The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair, the kind of place where emotions were stripped bare and every sound felt louder than it should. The young woman lay in her hospital bed, exhausted after hours of labor, her body aching and her heart fragile yet full in ways she had never known before. Her newborn slept beside her, wrapped tightly in a white blanket, breathing softly. This should have been one of the happiest moments of her life, but instead, tension hung in the air like an approaching storm. The door swung open without a knock. Her mother-in-law entered with sharp steps, her face tight, lips pressed into a thin line that spoke of judgment before a single word was uttered. She barely glanced at the baby. Her eyes were fixed on the young mother with cold intensity. Without lowering her voice, she began to speak, accusing, condemning, and dismissive. She said this hospital was not a place for people like her, that the family's reputation mattered more than comfort, and that it would be better if she left immediately and went back to wherever she came from. The words hit harder than the physical pain of childbirth. Nurses froze, pretending not to hear, unsure whether to intervene. The young woman tried to respond, but her throat tightened. Tears welled in her eyes, not from weakness, but from the deep injustice of being attacked at her most vulnerable moment. She clutched her baby closer, instinctively shielding the child from the harshness of the world that seemed to begin far too soon. The mother-in-law continued, growing more animated, convinced of her authority. She spoke of sacrifices, of traditions, of how she had endured worse in her time. She accused the young woman of ingratitude, of trapping her son, of bringing shame instead of joy. Each sentence was sharper than the last, designed to cut, to dominate, to force submission. It felt as though the walls themselves were closing in. Then, without warning, another voice cut through the tirade. Calm, steady, and unmistakably confident. The room fell silent as everyone turned toward the door. A woman had entered quietly, yet her presence was overwhelming. She didn't raise her voice, didn't rush, didn't look angry. She simply stood there, observing, her expression composed but firm. It took a second for recognition to dawn, and when it did, the shift in energy was instant. This was not just any visitor. This was someone accustomed to speaking truth to power, someone whose life had been defined by standing her ground in the face of intimidation. The mother-in-law's words faltered. Her confidence wavered. The newcomer addressed the situation directly, not with insults but with clarity. She spoke about respect, about boundaries, about the cruelty of asserting dominance over someone who had just given life. She reminded everyone in the room that strength was not measured by how loudly one spoke or how much fear one inspired, but by empathy and restraint. Each sentence landed with precision, dismantling the mother-in-law's authority piece by piece. The mother-in-law tried to interrupt, but the calm voice continued, unwavering. She pointed out that traditions meant nothing if they stripped people of dignity. That family was supposed to be a source of safety, not humiliation. That a woman who had just given birth deserved protection, not persecution. The room seemed to hold its breath as the balance of power shifted before everyone's eyes. The mother-in-law stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, unable to respond. The words she had relied on for years, control, guilt, obligation, no longer worked. For the first time, she was confronted by someone who could not be intimidated, someone who saw through her tactics and refused to play along. The young mother watched in disbelief. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt seen. Not pitied, not judged, but recognized as a human being deserving of compassion. The sudden guest turned to her gently, offering reassurance without condescension. A simple reminder that she was not alone, that her voice mattered, that this moment belonged to her and her child. Later, far from the hospital walls, a similar confrontation would play out on a very different stage. Under bright studio lights, with cameras rolling and an audience watching closely, a heated argument erupted. What began as a conversation quickly escalated into raised voices and sharp interruptions. Joy Behar pressed her point insistently, confident in her stance, accustomed to dominating the exchange. Jane Fonda, however, did not match aggression with aggression. She waited. She listened. And when she spoke, it was with the same calm authority that had silenced a room before. She challenged the framing of the argument, called out the underlying assumptions, and redirected the conversation with precision. Her words were firm but measured, refusing to be dragged into chaos. The shift was immediate. The audience sensed it. The dynamic changed. Joy Behar attempted to regain control, but the moment had passed. Jane Fonda's response was not about winning an argument, it was about redefining it. She spoke about responsibility, about awareness, about the danger of dismissing lived experiences. There was no shouting, no theatrics, just clarity. In both moments, the lesson was the same. Power does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it walks in quietly, stands its ground, and speaks the truth so plainly that resistance collapses under its own weight. Whether in a hospital room or a television studio, the effect was undeniable. For the young mother, that day marked a turning point. The mother-in-law left without another word, her authority shattered, her control broken. Nurses resumed their duties, the room exhaled, and peace slowly returned. The baby stirred, unaware of the battle that had been fought on their behalf. And for viewers watching the exchange on television, the impact lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. It was a reminder that composure can be more powerful than outrage, that standing firm does not require cruelty, and that sometimes, the most decisive shutdown comes not from shouting someone down, but from refusing to be moved at all. The maternity ward was unusually quiet for that hour, wrapped in the soft hum of machines and the distant shuffle of nurses' shoes against polished floors. For the young woman lying in the hospital bed, time felt suspended. Her body was heavy with exhaustion, her mind drifting between pain and wonder as she stared at the tiny face of her newborn. This was supposed to be a moment of warmth and celebration, a fragile beginning filled with hope. Instead, it became the stage for a confrontation she never imagined enduring so soon after giving birth. The door opened abruptly, breaking the fragile calm. Her mother-in-law entered with a posture that radiated control, her eyes scanning the room with thinly veiled disapproval. She did not smile, did not ask how the birth had gone, and barely acknowledge the baby. Her focus locked onto the young mother, and without preamble, she began to speak. Her voice was sharp, carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. She questioned why the young woman was still in the hospital, criticized the expenses, and accused her of being weak and dramatic. The words quickly escalated from criticism to outright hostility. She claimed the young woman was unfit, that she had brought disgrace into the family, and that it would be better if she left the hospital immediately. According to her, there was no place in their family for someone who did not know her role. Each sentence landed like a blow, echoing against the sterile walls. Nurses exchanged uneasy glances but stayed silent, unsure whether they were witnessing a private family matter or something that required intervention. The young mother felt her chest tighten as humiliation and disbelief washed over her. She tried to speak, but the mother-in-law cut her off repeatedly, raising her voice and leaning closer, asserting dominance. Tears slipped down the young woman's cheeks, not just from hurt, but from the overwhelming sense of isolation. She held her baby tighter, feeling a fierce protective instinct rise within her, even as her confidence crumbled. Just as the confrontation reached its peak, the atmosphere shifted. Footsteps approached, measured and unhurried. A woman appeared in the doorway, her presence calm yet commanding. She did not rush to the center of the room or raise her voice. She simply stood there, observing the scene with clear, discerning eyes. The mother-in-law paused mid-sentence, irritation flickering across her face at the interruption. When the newcomer spoke, her tone was composed but resolute. She asked a simple question that cut through the tension: what exactly was happening here? There was no accusation in her voice, just an expectation of accountability. The mother-in-law attempted to justify herself, insisting she was only protecting family values. But the calm visitor did not argue. Instead, she dismantled the justification piece by piece, pointing out the cruelty of attacking a woman who had just given birth and the harm such behavior caused. She spoke about empathy as a responsibility, not a weakness. She reminded everyone present that childbirth was not a test of endurance meant to earn respect, but a profound human experience deserving of care and dignity. Her words were not dramatic, yet they carried weight. The room fell silent, every eye drawn to the quiet authority she projected. The mother-in-law's confidence began to unravel. She tried to assert her status, but the visitor met her gaze steadily, unmoved. There was no fear, no submission, only firm boundaries. Slowly, the older woman's voice faltered. She had no response that could compete with reason delivered so clearly. For the first time, she stood speechless, stripped of the power she had wielded through intimidation. Turning to the young mother, the visitor softened her tone. She offered reassurance, reminding her that she had done nothing wrong, that strength was not defined by silence or obedience. The young woman felt a surge of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her chest. Someone had finally named the injustice out loud. The mother-in-law left the room soon after, her steps no longer confident, her authority diminished. The ward slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. Nurses resumed their duties, and the young mother allowed herself to breathe deeply for the first time since the ordeal began. She looked down at her baby, realizing that this moment, painful as it was, had also awakened something new within her, the resolve to protect both herself and her child. Elsewhere, under the glare of studio lights, a different but strangely similar confrontation unfolded. A televised discussion grew heated as strong opinions clashed. Joy Behar pressed her argument with familiar intensity, her voice rising as she challenged opposing views. The exchange threatened to spiral into chaos, the kind of on-air conflict designed to provoke reaction rather than understanding. Fonda sat composed, listening carefully. She did not interrupt, did not raise her voice to compete for attention. When she finally spoke, her response was measured and deliberate. She addressed the core of the argument rather than the noise surrounding it, questioning assumptions and reframing the discussion. Her words carried the authority of experience and conviction. As she continued, the dynamic shifted noticeably. Joy Behar attempted to interject, but Fonda held her ground without aggression. She spoke about accountability, about listening rather than overpowering, and about the responsibility that comes with having a platform. The audience sensed the change, the tension drained from confrontation into reflection. The moment resonated because it echoed a deeper truth. Whether in a private hospital room or a public television studio, power rooted in intimidation crumbles when confronted by calm clarity. Fonda's shutdown was not a spectacle of anger, but a demonstration of control through composure. It reminded viewers that being firm does not require being loud, and that respect can be demanded without hostility. For the young mother, the events of that day became a defining memory. The sudden guest who stepped in did more than end a confrontation, she modeled a way of standing up that did not rely on cruelty or fear. That lesson stayed with the young woman as she moved forward into motherhood, determined to break cycles of humiliation and control. In the end, both stories converged on the same message. True strength reveals itself in moments of pressure, not through dominance, but through the courage to speak with honesty and restraint. Silence, when imposed, is oppression. Silence, when earned by truth, is power.